Welcome to Leader's Journey podcast. I'm your host, Joel Gunn, and today I have with me Phyllis. Phyllis, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Joel. Happy to be here.
Yeah, it's my honor to have you. So, little tidbit about Phyllis. She is the first person I've ever met that was born and from Victoria, Texas.
Yahoo!
Yeah, so lived in Texas all your life. And another little fun fact about Phyllis is she knows how to use a chainsaw and actually enjoys it. So I'll let let the audience, when they meet you in person, unpack that with you. So won't steal the thunder there, but
That's great.
Loves to build fires, loves to garden, loves to read. So really, though, Phyllis, why I'm super excited to have you here today is you've had a lot of exposure to leadership, either as a leader yourself or working with leaders. And then, of course, now this last number of months, you've started working directly with CEOs and coaching CEOs. So just love to pick your brain a little bit, about leadership, what your experience has been, what you've seen, what works, what doesn't work. And just, you and I talked a little bit before the show, maybe some directions we could go with that. But I'd like to start with this idea of that you and you touched on briefly, this idea of authenticity. How does a leader, how do they be their authentic self while they're leading, but also you can only share so much with certain audiences, right? You don't want to go to your customers and say, not sure how I'm going to make payroll this week, right? And nor do you want to go to your junior staff and say, hey guys, not sure how I'm going to make payroll this week. So how does a leader be authentic, share what they need to share personally or business? What have you seen work or not work? What are your thoughts on that?
I've always felt like transparency, authenticity is a really critical part of leadership. People don't trust you until they know you, and they don't really know you till they see what goes wrong just as much as what goes right. And so I have found just being myself, being true to who I am, and caring for the people around me, it comes across. They can feel that they're cared for. And when appropriate, when circumstances dictate, when I'm faced with someone who's got a challenge in their life, and it's a place I've been that I can breathe something into, even though it might be something painful from my past or something that I wouldn't want to put on a billboard, I'll share it. It's not something that I'm going to hide from anybody, who I am, what I've been through in the past. And that has garnered over time a lot of respect, because people, they know where I'm coming from and they know I'm willing. Also, I think part of that is just being willing to roll up your sleeves and work alongside people. And you can take that too far, doing the work and not leading. Some people will escape into doing the work and not leading. But there are times where that authenticity and that transparency comes out in just working alongside people.
You talked about vulnerability with a person in the moment. Mm-hmm. How often would you say, if you look back at your tenure as a CEO, your life experience, how often would you say you practice that vulnerability one-on-one? What percent of the time versus in a group?
It's pretty much who I've always been. I can't think of a time where I was either one-on-one with a staff person, with a board member that I was reporting to, with somebody in the community, that I wasn't pretty honest and vulnerable about who I was. That doesn't mean that when I say people behave differently in different circumstances, there's a conversation you might have with a board member based on their life experiences that you're going to try to relate to them and bring out parts of you that they can relate to. Whereas if I'm walking through a retail store when I was running Habitat for Humanity and had all these restores with lots of stuff in them. And I was walking through the retail store, I could draw back on my own life experience of having worked in retail, working my way through high school, college, and knowing what it was like to put in the long hours, to stand on the floor, to deal with irate customers. And so to be able to know where they're coming from and for them to know that I understood, that can go a long way.
Did you, the way you're wired, okay, we're not asking Phyllis to be somebody she's not.
Right.
The way you're wired, if that you and I haven't known each other a super long time, but the feels like you're pretty quick to connect with people. Is that an accurate assessment?
I think so. And I'm not sure why that is, but it's always been the case as long as I can remember, having a love for people and deep desire to connect and understand people, understand where they're coming from, has always been something that's been important to me. And so what that does is it creates a lot of relationships, which is great, especially in the fields I've been in, because you do need to be more broad than deep, but there's a danger there. And you find that as you get older, like you have to be intentional about going deep on some relationships. It's so important, especially as you age, really, to have those long-term friends.
Finding that intentionality, was that a purposeful exercise you did, like once a year, or I need to go deeper with these folks? Was it just more of a sense that I need to spend more time with this person, or how would you describe that?
I think there have been points in my life where I have realized that I have exited a community and left a group of people that I have grown very close to and worked alongside, come alongside, and had to move to another location, start all over again with another group of people. And I've stayed connected with those people, and it's been wonderful. I mean, it's wonderful actually to pop into different communities and do community development because you have the opportunity to just meet so many people. But it's harder when you're physically removed to keep up those relationships with people that mean a lot to you. And so I do feel like there are people in communities that I have been in that I could pick up the phone today and drive down and spend the weekend with just because we had such a bond. But I think part of that is honestly, as a woman and a leader, you've got that additional burden a lot of times with the child rearing and the family, that has constricted my time and constricted my availability to spend the time with some of the folks that I wish I had, looking back in life. If there's one thing I wish I had done is spend more time with some of the people that are the dearest to me.
How do you handle that now?
I try not to make excuses when people want to get together. If it's for lunch after church on Sunday or driving to town, I can think of a million reasons why I'd rather just get to the grocery store and get home. Or today I drove into town for lunch and it's a 45, 50-minute drive in, an hour drive back. And I could have easily said, oh, why don't we just meet for a Zoom call? But the relationship was important enough to make a point to be there in person. And I'm so glad I did. Like when I've done it, it feels so good. But at the time, it's like, okay, you have to make sacrifices to do that sometimes. But it's worth it.
That's one area I've probably been very weak at most of my life. And like you, in recent years, I've started thinking about almost personally, I'm not saying any of the viewers or you would take this as a failure, but I was seeing it as a personal failure.
Yeah.
And so just this last Saturday, we were invited to one of my clients' birthday party Saturday evening and my nephew's birthday party Saturday at lunch, which normally is not a challenge, except my nephew lives 3 hours from my house.
Yeah.
So normally I would have used that as an excuse, like, sorry, can't,
Yeah.
But it just was important to my wife Christine has always been good at loving on people.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've learned to be better at that, hanging around her. But so we got up early Saturday, drove up there. We were there for lunch, there for 2 hours, and then back. So 6 hours round trip for a 2 hour birthday party.
And good for you.
And then changed clothes and made it to the more formal event that evening. And uh, but it was the reason I share that's not to brag or anything, but it's to, like, you could have easily said, I don't want to drive 2 hours round trip for a 45-minute or an hour lunch,
Mm.
but you invested, and that's new for me, or newer for me. And you're right, there's just something about, when we got to the end of the day, we were, we're tired,
Yeah.
obviously.
Yeah.
By the way, my client lives an hour from my house. So we were on the road almost 8 hours on Saturday for about 4 hours worth of party. So
I totally relate.
anyway, but you're right. There is something, as we put people first. So it feels like it comes more naturally to you than it does to me. The time that I've hung around you, you're very genuine and transparent and inviting. Uh, I'm having to learn to be that way, and to put a priority on people and on relationships. But we both had the same result. You walked away from it going, man, I'm glad I did that.
Yeah.
And I walked away from it going, man, I'm glad I did that.
Yeah.
And I think, well, let me flip this into a question. The leaders that you look back on in life that you felt like were the best leaders, whether they were mentors to you or not, or whether they were crucial in your journey in life or not, but the leaders you've been exposed to, what processes versus people, where's their priority?
Yeah. Yeah. So some of the best leaders that I've worked alongside, super smart, full of process. I mean, just brilliant business minds, but deeply care about people. And if you sit down with them, you're the most important person in the room. And they remember details about you the next time they see you. And your spouse's name, something you told them the last time. That has always impressed me deeply. And when I have not been able to do that, it has just, it's eat at me. It's like, why can't I remember? I think that's not one of the gifts God gave me. He did give me a gift, me and lots of people, but that memory for names is just not one of those gifts he gave me. But it is so, it's so meaningful. It's so meaningful when you're with somebody that you know has a lot on their plate and a lot of responsibility, but they're taking the time for you. And so I've tried to do that. If someone has reached out to me, and particularly younger leaders, they've reached out to me, or emerging leaders, and have wanted to have a conversation either about my career journey, which they may look at my resume and think it's brilliant and it's just a complete accident, but it looks smart. But they'll look at that and think, oh, you planned this so well. And I'm like, no, I just walked in the doors that opened, and thank the Lord, he actually opened some. But just taking the time to be with them, and then to be real with them, and to give them some hope that if somebody can stumble through life like me and end up with a resume that looks good in any way, that they can do it too.
The people that you've chosen to follow over the years, whether that be professionally or spiritually or whatever, what again, just I want to emphasize this possible point. I'm hoping this is hoping this has been your experience. The ones that really value people, was there something that was attractive, or was it, or really didn't make a difference?
I definitely think it was very attractive. The people that I have met over time, and there's some people I've met that just love other people and they are so genuine. And I can think of one gentleman in particular that I need to get together with again soon. And it's like every time you see him, he's like just lights up, like you just absolutely made a stay.
Mm.
And when I first met him, I almost felt like it was fake. I was like, nobody can be that happy all the time. I mean, and I'm a generally pretty happy person, but I just like so bubbling over. And the longer I've gotten to know him, the more I've gotten to realize that just really is who he is.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he believes in the Lord. He believes he's so blessed. He loves his family. One of my favorite jokes that he always tells is, well, the key worked when I got home, so all is good with the world. But just genuinely a loving, caring person, and this person's in business development, and I can't imagine that doesn't open a lot of doors because he never walks into a meeting with you asking for anything.
Mm-hmm.
He's just connecting with you and seeing how things have been going since the last time you've met, and everything always feels very genuine, and it's just always impressed me when you meet people like that to the core, that's just who they are. It's not a show.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it makes a difference, and it makes you trust them, and it makes you want to share them with other people.
You mentioned moments ago climbing in, rolling up your sleeves, but not to a point where you got lost in the day-to-day work. Unpack that a little bit for me from a perspective of CEO, a leader, a CEO coach now.
Yeah. I think when I first entered a leadership role, running a small nonprofit at the time, I left the for-profit world, got into the nonprofit world, but moved into a CEO role. I found that I had to dig in and do a lot of stuff. I had to learn a lot of stuff. But more importantly, I had to start to vision what the organization was going to look like in the future. And so there was a necessity to step away. And learning that discipline really early on, that I couldn't stay in that business 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, because I would try to just do it all and get it all done at that time. I didn't trust in the Lord enough to know that he had this, and I was trying to do it all on my own. But at least I had the sense of knowing I needed time away to step and work on the business, and was willing to invest in that. And over time, as roles and responsibilities grew and organizations got bigger and I had more people to lead, I soon realized that my more important job was training the people around me how to do their jobs well and set a vision for them of where we were headed. It wasn't doing the work. But it was always working to prepare them to be better. And that, that became more challenging. And the bigger the groups are, the more things you have to put in place to be able to really make sure you're taking care of all your people in the way they need to be taken care of. But I think if people feel valued, if they're invested in, and if you're trusting them to do things, that's how you grow as a leader.
Trusting your people.
Yeah, not always easy.
I think that probably scares most leaders.
Yeah, well, you get burned. When you trust, you will get burned. There's no doubt about it. Everyone's not trustworthy, and sometimes it's hard to figure that out until you've put them in a position to succeed or fail. But most people are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and it's worth it. It's worth it to do it.
I've probably stated the obvious with my clients over the years, but I haven't met maybe one, but I haven't met a whole lot of people that roll out of bed going, I'm going to see just how bad of a job I can do today.
That's right.
That's not why they come to work. They want to feel like they're contributing. They want to feel like they're adding to some sort of value. And so you talked about, as a leader, you got to draw that out of them. You mentioned training, and really helping them recognize how to do their jobs or why to do their jobs. Did you find any particular methodologies that worked well or mindsets that helped you in those times?
I think over time, I kind of developed some skills in that space. One of the things was to spend time early on with teams, getting them to buy into the why of whatever we were doing. My first year or two at an organization really was drilling down on mission and vision and getting people individually to be bought in to why they were there. Because like you can't do that for somebody. You can share your why, but you can't make them feel that. And then as you get to know people, you start to unpack, being a leader is a lot like being a parent, and people bring stuff that's happened to them ever since childhood into the workplace. And so understanding where people's fears are and helping them feel safe in those spaces so that they can start to grow has been another thing that I've seen really can make a big difference, because a lot of times what holds people back is their own fear.
Do you, when you see that fear in them, do you call it out, or do you just make mental note of it and work to undo it?
Usually I call it out. Yeah. And that's where sharing with them the similar fears I've had, and maybe how I've, and asking for permission, because a lot of times it comes unpacked. Always do lots of one-on-ones, and then be able to unpack like why were they hesitant? Why were they not supporting something? Why were they not going there? And eventually, typically it comes out in one way or another that they're fearful of something. It's either losing their job or getting replaced or not being viewed as important because we go down this path, or their idea wasn't recognizing, to just understanding where that fear is coming from, and then being able to help that person see that they have value and that their contributions are appreciated, even if this pet project that they'd been working on, we didn't move forward with.
I think you've mentioned more in this last few minutes about meeting with your people one-on-one than possibly any leader I've met. Which, according to all the research, is huge and is necessary and is appropriate. And actually, Marcus Buckingham at GLS a few years ago said, if you don't have time to meet one-on-one with your people for a few minutes every week, get out of leadership. Which I thought was a pretty bold claim or statement on his part. Sounds like it's valuable to you. Talk about that a little bit more. How did you do that? Was it something you had to train yourself to do, to put it on the calendar? How could the listening audience, if they're not particularly great at this yet, maybe what are some tips or tricks you found over the years?
One thing someone told me early on was not to have more people that report to you that you could meet one-on-one for an hour with a week. And I have at times had more than I could meet with one-on-one. I think the max I ever had was 11, and that was just too many. And I had to do that were immediate reports, and then they all had people underneath them. And I had to work on that and do some restructuring, which is always hard, because I think one of the hardest things you can do is when you've become attached to somebody is removing them a level down. I mean, you have to have a lot of trust to move into that space. And I give the people that I did that with so much credit for being so respectful and understanding. Because they were the very first ones to say, you've got too many people reporting to you. Of course, they weren't wanting themselves to be the one you took out of that role. And so, just that, I've entered into those spaces with that. I remember the last job I was at, when I got there, it was pretty dysfunctional, and the last CEO had been fired. And so coming into a space where there's a lot of fear and distrust, and just like what's going to happen in the future, and who is this woman, what's she going to do? And I, in the first month, met with every staff person one-on-one, and there were 42 people at the organization at the time for an hour minimum, because I wanted to hear from them, and then I wanted them to know who I was. And so at that particular time, it didn't matter if they were bringing in donations at a door, or working on the construction site, or in the office. We got to know each other, and because I needed their buy-in to start moving things forward. It became harder the longer I was there and the more people we hired, because I couldn't meet with 140 something people when I left one-on-one every week. That physically doesn't work.
Sure.
Nor could I meet with all 42. I was down to a more reasonable number at that time. But one thing I did do was create, I did little things. I would do like Zoom calls with everyone, or sometimes we would do, all staff, or karaoke was always my favorite. But I would, I created I think one of the things that was a lot of fun was I created a welcome video that they put into our payroll app. So when they were signing up, they would get this welcome video from me, just welcome to the organization. I got to share a little bit about my heart for them and why I was glad they were there. And it's funny how something that small, I would forget it was there, but they felt like they were touched personally. And when I would run into them in the hall, they would, they would act like they knew me. I was like, I haven't met this person yet. They're not wearing any tag.
But they'd met you.
But they felt like they met me, and that was important. And so it obviously helped serve that purpose, which was good.
That's a neat idea. I'm not sure I've heard of a business owner or leader doing that before. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
In your one-on-one sessions, did you have an agenda typically going in, or was there a format? Was there kind of anything went? The hour came and went, and how did you keep that productive, but at the same time maintain the authenticity, maintain the productivity of the meeting, but also maintain that relationship in that hour? How'd that look?
It looked different in different seasons. Periodically I would read a book that would say you had to do these 5 questions. And so I would try that approach of doing these 5 questions for a while. And I would always end up failing miserably because I couldn't stick to the agenda and would lose my 5 questions and couldn't remember what they were. That must be on the lines of remembering people's names. That was one of my, not one of my gifts, but I always appreciated, and I think this is for people that are aspiring and growing, I always appreciated people that would show up with their own agenda, that self-prepared, because the session is as valuable as the person wants it to be. I only have so much bandwidth to breathe into everyone's life, and so they have to kind of come at it with something. And so we would talk a bit early on. That, my expectation was that you come with your agenda of things you want to cover. I'm going to have things. We should be covering things that when I would do a whole leadership team meeting, we also did that weekly. When we did a leadership team meeting, we shouldn't be going over the things that were just one-on-one. If we could solve it in our one-on-one session, then it didn't need to be in the room with the other 6 or 8 people. It could just be us one-on-one. We moved into the leadership team. Those were things everybody needed to wrestle through together. And there were times where some of it was just relationship building. I always would start out personally with how's it going? What's going on with the family, especially if there was something specific going on, but just kind of touching base on what's going on in their life. And then if there was a performance issue, if there was a problem, we would kind of dive into that. And it was diving into it with the intent of trying to come up with resolutions and next steps and how we were going to move forward.
I had a leader, a boss one time, relationship mattered to him. And so we'd open up our time together, something lighthearted, personal, how's the family, whatever. And then somewhere, 12 minutes in, I just made up that number, but he'd be like, okay, well, let's get to business, and, but he very much cared. He just also, had worldwide responsibilities for a large organization. And so he knew, time is precious and it's valuable and it needs to be productive, but he also wanted to convey hey, I care about you. How's your, and with his closer staff, he would tend to remember details, kids' names and things like that, and would do that quick check-in. But it never offended me that we went from the personal to the business. Was your transition that harsh, or was it? I don't mean harsh. I mean that quick.
Yeah, probably not. I think mine was probably more gradual. I think most of the folks that I directly supervised had enough issues of their own that they were ready after we got through the niceties. And that wasn't the only time I visited with them or checked in on them. So, but I would see if I hadn't seen them in a couple of weeks, if we've been missing each other, that they would want to spend more time in that space. And if I've spent more time with them because we're working on other things, they would dive immediately or a lot more quickly into the work part of it. And, either way is fine. I mean, I think you do have to be kind of flexible. I think the leader I mentioned earlier I felt like so good and so caring and had worldwide, operations and thousands of employees. And he'd care about you very much, but he was also a West Point grad, and he was very methodical about, time. And, you would be in a meeting. If it was 45 minutes and you were 20 minutes in, he would let you know you were 20 minutes in and you only had this many minutes left in the meeting. And are we getting to the point? And I always appreciated that. I mean, he had a clock going in the back of his head because he knew he had a certain amount of time he had to spend with you. And he wanted to make sure that the things you came to get solved got solved in that time frame. And so I think that there's so much wisdom in that.
Did you ever run out of time in those hour one-on-ones?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. How did you help your people learn to prioritize the thing? Let's get to the things we got to get to. These other things can wait. Because certainly it can be frustrating for somebody that's not attuned to, how to manage their time or expectations. How did you coach people through that?
Well, I think because we met every week, they knew that there was going to be another session coming up. And they knew they could always reach out to me via email or whatever. If it was something that didn't have to get solved face to face, that they could send something to me, and then I would get to it when I could get to it, but I would likely get a response back to them before the next session. It was pretty responsive. So I don't think they ever felt like just completely out of touch. And so seldom did it present a problem, but there were times where I would cancel whatever was coming after and spend another hour with somebody just because I really felt like it was necessary at the time. I think, those parameters. Then there were other people that I had to have things back to back so that they would know it was over and I could end it, because they could probably spend the whole day doing that. Yeah. It just gets to knowing your people. Yeah.
As you work with CEOs now, one-on-one with a monthly, have you set that same expectation? You want them to bring the agenda in, or has that changed at all for you?
I am trying to get them to do that. But having been a CEO that had a coach, and it was a C12 coach, I was probably one of the worst. It's one thing to do what I say, but don't,
do what I did.
Do what I did. And so I did not always show up to those sessions. I was so busy preparing for my own people, and I didn't always show up to those sessions in a way that would make them as fruitful as they could have been. I value just having somebody to bounce things off of, and sometimes just a place to decompress for a while. But I am really working on getting people to show up with something, and in fact have been kind of really having to question my own bad practices in that space and go, if I'm really going to grow as a coach and help these CEOs grow, I've got to show them how to do this. And I'm going to show up very prepared, but I'm going to start assigning certain things that I want them to always bring and do before the meeting, so that we can be as productive as possible. Because some people have just never been in that space before. As a leader of a company, they've never sat with their team one-on-one, and they've never participated necessarily in those one-on-one sessions. And so it's just not natural for them. and they've got to develop the skills around it. And so I need to take responsibility for that.
You mentioned a moment ago, though, when you were CEO meeting with your C12 coach, sometimes you just needed to decompress. That's been my experience with my clients as well. How do you do you just sense that that's what's needed, or do you have some questions you use at the beginning of the one-on-one just to kind of diagnose where this is going to go?
Yeah. Well, when I ask them how it's going, what's been on their heart, what are they praying about right now? What's the biggest issue that they're facing that they could really use some guidance and counsel on? Sometimes that's where it becomes really evident. Because sometimes the issue they're facing isn't really with work, but it's impacting their work. And they need to go have somebody to talk that out with. And then that's one of the reasons you participate in C12 or another CEO peer group, is there isn't a place. This is not something some of these things that you have, these burdens that you're carrying, are not things that you can talk to with your team about. And we talked about that earlier. We can't, you can't necessarily, there's that level of transparency that might be too transparent. And some of it may be staffing issues, and some of it may be staff interpersonal conflicts that you're trying to help them walk through. And it could be some issues that the company's facing that you're needing to kind of have somebody else listen to you and see if what you're thinking is making sense, and do some praying on that together. And so being, I think I just don't want to be so rigid that I'm not open to what's going on in the moment. And I don't think that's ever going to be perfect, but I think that by being flexible, we can meet people where they're at, and just continuously push them. I mean, they're all at different stages. And so trying to say, okay, this is where they're at. This is their past experience. They're not used to this yet. This is how we're going to get them comfortable in this space, versus somebody else who, I have some that just show up and they've got a list of questions, and we start with prayer. They just dive in, have to slow them down every once in a while, and the hour's up and we're both exhausted, but they've definitely got a value for their time, because they've spent the time to think about in advance what they really want some counsel on.
Well, like most things in life, I hear my C12 members say, you get out of it what you put into it.
It's so true.
We've been talking mostly around people, which is huge. Have you met leaders that were hesitant to be authentic or personable or open or dive into these messy people issues? And if so, why do you think that was? Why do you think they were hesitant to be more people oriented?
I don't know. And I hate to read into people, because I don't know always what's going on, but I have seen folks that just, there are some that are fearful that if they share their whole self, that people will think less of them. That they've actually failed at something, or that they haven't always made the right decisions. And one of the things I would try to do is to be innovative, to change things, to move the needle. We're going to make mistakes. And that would be one of the very first things I would tell people. And I would emphasize that a lot. The mistakes are okay. But we expect you to be responsible. I mean, don't do stupid stuff, but mistakes are okay. We just don't want to repeat them. Can we learn from those? Can we authentically share that in a group and then move forward together because we've learned from that? But that also means they have to be vulnerable and transparent. They have to be willing to admit that they've made a mistake. When I see leaders that are afraid to share their own mistakes, to say, these are things I'm fearful of, this I've got it all figured out mentality. It tends to come crumbling down when things don't go well. And that's not necessarily good and healthy. So I think there's just that happy balance. I mean, you definitely want to exude confidence where it's warranted, and but where's that confidence coming from?
Mm.
Is it coming from, and for me, knowing that God's in control and knowing that He owns all of this and He already knows how it ends is something I check myself with all the time. I can remember times where we were undertaking some really big construction projects and we needed to raise several $1 million to make it happen, gap funding and things like that. And it got complicated and we were trying all these different scenarios, and people would get sort of fearful. And I would be like, God is the greatest creator of all. I mean, the greatest builder of all time. I mean, He's created the universe. He's a master builder. And so He knows the answer to these questions. So let's bring Him into this conversation. And let's rest in the assurance that we as a team with the right input can figure this out. And that would settle people down.
Interesting. Were all these people religious or
no? No, most, but not all. But I think that it created a space where, I don't know, I have a hard time believing some people don't believe there's a God. They may not want to submit to Him, but I think deep down they know. And that I've never had an instance where anybody's pushed back on that kind of thinking.
Wow. That's very cool to hear, because that's a fear that leaders that are, Christians or Christ followers, they're like, well, if I talk about this too much, I'm going to alienate my people, or, they're going to feel ostracized or whatever. And what you just shared sounds like it actually drew them closer to you in relationship.
Well, I think it did, because they know who I am, but then I have to be authentic and walk in that. The scary part of doing that, as you can't go and say something like that and then not act like you believe it. When things start messing up, you can't move to a place of fear or a place of pointing fingers or pushing people under the bus. Because if you claim to be a Christ follower and you talk about it in the workplace, but then your actions don't look like the actions of somebody who believes that, that can do a lot of damage. And so I think it also kind of forces me to check myself. What does it say in Proverbs? A man's ways seem wise. All a person's ways seem wise to them, but motives are judged by the Lord. Yeah. And I was like, that's like super convicting for me. Like, yeah, seems really smart, but what's the motive behind it?
We've all dropped the ball, messed up somehow, representing God. Certainly, it's difficult to, hold ourselves out as Christian leaders, and then, like you said, people are going put us up on a pedestal for some reason, and expect that we're going to be perfect. Did you have a time where you weren't perfect, and how did you address that with the people?
Confession and asking for forgiveness. I had a direct report that I just didn't see eye to eye with, and we finally sat down, brought a mediator in, and because I just needed to get to the bottom of it and figure out why we couldn't work better together. And some of this was stuff this person had brought, from years and years of just trauma. And but there were things I had said and done that fed and fueled it that I had never intended. And there's a lot of vulnerability with stopping and saying, tell me why you feel that way and what I've done. And then saying, okay, I heard you. You just said this. and repeating it back to them so that they feel heard. And then just not defending yourself, but just saying, I'm sorry. You know, that must have felt awful. And that was not my intent. And I really feel bad about that. I'm really sorry. And that went a long way to healing.
Do you, not to put words in your or their mouth, but do you think that person valued the relationship more after that conversation?
I have had, I would say yes, that particular one. But I have had some of those, just some relationships just be unrepairable. And that, I think, goes back to not discerning well before the hiring process. Really, you know, just I've had instances where I've let a team do the hiring, and either I wasn't involved or I didn't ensure that the right framework was established to vet not just the person's technical capabilities, but their moral framework and how they make decisions and things like that. And those are things that, you know, those are the things you learn the hard way.
Speaking of the hiring process, people tuning into the podcast, what things did you find were helpful in the hiring process, and what got you in trouble more often than not?
It was really helpful to be clear on the values of the organization, the expectations of how we would behave, and to ask more questions about how they deal with certain instances than to dig into their technical expertise. Where I grew over time was realizing that you can figure out their technical expertise from their resume and from talking to people they've worked with. And you always should talk to people they worked with, regardless. And I always talk to people that are not on their list of references. Like, give me your list of references. Okay, I'm going to look up people that are not on this list and call them. But I think you know, that asking questions that elicit more of who they are as a person, and those can be really odd questions. You know, how they deal with certain circumstances, what's more important to them, how have they approached certain things in the past. Just helps you start to get a picture of the person. I had one young lady that wanted to come work for us, and on paper looked amazing. I mean, genius, you know, Mensa, she had it listed on the resume.
Wow.
And she really was. And, you know, and I mean, could do the job all day long. And didn't like where she was at currently, which is always a sign for me. But I wanted to know why. And so I did my questions, but did some more digging in around that. And it was funny because she was like, I was trying to understand why she thought this was going to be different and better. And one of the things about the nonprofit space is people think that it's going to be nirvana.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like I'm going to come there and we're going to make the world a beautiful place. And there's butterflies floating through the atmosphere. It smells like cotton candy. You know,
all my coworkers are going to love me.
Everybody's going to love me. There's not going to be any problems. And so she comes from one nonprofit where they have problems. And so suddenly thought this one's going to be better. And so I was like, what makes you think we're better? And well, you're a top workplace and you won a best CEO award and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, she just goes down the list. So she it checked all her boxes. And I'm like, okay, so I want to just clear up some misconceptions. I said, we are not perfect. We're a bunch of flawed humans that are working together and we give each other a lot of grace. I said, I'm definitely not perfect. And if you come in here with that expectation, you're going to be sadly disappointed. And I'm thankful that we got best workplaces, but we have all the problems every other workplace has. We have lots of people here and they bring their baggage to work and we have to wrestle through it. But we are a place of faith. We'll pray before meetings. We're sincere and we're honest. But if you think you're going to come here, it's going to solve all your problems. You're never going to have interpersonal problems. You're in the wrong place. And she just like her jaws dropped because she don't think anyone had ever told her that in an interview before. But I was like, you're not going to jump from, I said, how you enjoy your work has more to do with what you bring to the table than what the workplace brings. And so who are you going to bring to the table that's going to make this a different experience than what you had in the past? And she really couldn't answer that.
Wow.
And we didn't hire her. And that was probably a really good move.
It sounds like it was. Did you so you're in for-profit and nonprofit space. Did you, over the years interviewing people, were there one or two go-to questions that you found were particularly revealing or powerful or helpful?
That's a good question. I had a list of 20. I'd be happy to share those with you, but they really centered around share the three best things that have happened to you in the workplace and then share the three worst things that have happened. Because I always feel like you have to open up with letting them tell the good story before you can get them to start unloading a bit on what they don't like about the place that they're with. And I want to find out what they don't like about the place that they're at now before they get here, because whatever that was, they're probably not going to like it here either.
Right.
Yeah. And so is this a problem that they're going to continuously keep looking for a new job to solve this hole in their life? Because that's not how you fill the hole in your life. God's the only one that can make you feel complete. But people seem to think that they're going to come to this new job that's going to solve all their problems. The grass is always greener.
Sure.
And so I would try to get to the root of by asking a lot of questions that always started with the positive, let them get all that out of the way, and then throw in the reverse of that and try to get the negative out of them. I would try to dig into what it was they didn't like about the place they were in, because eventually if you ask enough questions, it'll come out, because it's a rub, and that's why they're wanting to leave. And then I could figure out, is that really something that we're going to be able to do differently for them? And a lot of times just point blank ask them about that. How are you going to approach it when it happens here?
Well, that's good. That's really good. Well, Phyllis, we certainly could go a lot longer. I think I've very much enjoyed our time so far, but just to put a bow around this, if somebody had to make the choice, well, business owners have to do it all the time.
Yeah.
They have to choose between getting things done and relationship. Did you find a way to bring that into some sort of healthy tension?
I think you can get things done with relationship. I often found, if I can come into work with a great attitude myself, because as a leader, you set the tone for the organization. If you walk in happy, you have to take care of yourself. And if you walk in happy and rested and vibrant and genuinely enjoying the people you're with while you're rolling up your sleeves, whether you're painting the side of a house or cleaning the kitchen or preparing for a board meeting or leading at some event or whatever it is that's going on, and you're enjoying it in the moment, the people around you are going to enjoy it. If you're tense and uptight and worried about the outcomes and fretting every little decision and nervous about getting fired yourself, everyone feels that, and they're not going to enjoy their work. So, and if someone was really struggling with something, a lot of times I would come alongside them and say, let's figure this out together. And we would have fun doing it. We would just kind of laugh and joke while we were doing it. And so I always thought, if I could come into the workplace and enjoy my day with the people, they're going to have a good experience and we're going to get the work done.
A friend of mine recently started a business, and I was talking to him about his core values, and he got to a point, and he goes, "Can sarcasm be a core value?" Yeah. It's like, well,
if it could, I probably could put that on my list.
I was like, well, you can always put it in there, but that might be one of those
selling point.
One of those documents we don't show the rest of the world. But you can certainly make a lighthearted, core value, or having fun a core value. And he goes, yeah, but it needs to have a sarcastic twist.
I love that.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate the authenticity. Yeah. Speaking of authenticity, thank you so much, Phyllis, for being vulnerable today in our conversation and sharing from your heart. Certainly were some nuggets of gold that you shared with us, and hopefully it somebody viewing this podcast or listening to it in the future, it'll make a difference in their life. And so thank you so much for your time today. Any final thoughts?
You know, for too many years, I felt like I had to do everything in my own, with my own energy, in my own way. I came out of college thinking I'll work harder than everybody else. I'll sleep after I die. All those things, and I really believed that, and that works for a little while, but it is not a path to success, and it doesn't lead to happiness. It doesn't lead to fulfillment. When I learned to put God first, to start my day, carve out time for Him every single day, and start my day with Him, things started falling into place. And I had a lot more clarity and a lot more peace. And I think that's really what we're all after, is peace.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. Again, an honor to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for giving of yourself and your time. And we'll chat soon.
It sounds great. Thanks, Joel. Appreciate it.
You. Bye-bye.
Bye.